Imagine waking up, you check your hardware wallet, and you just watch $1.5 billion vanish in like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's not because your cryptography failed, right? Not because you gave away your seed phrase, but literally because the screen that you trusted just lied to you.
Right. It's wild.
You poured this thick concrete for your digital vault, but then you went and put the bank vault door on a tent.
That is exactly what happened.
Yeah, and that's what happened this week in one of the largest institutional custodial failures we have ever seen. And, for you listening, it is this stark reminder that in the world of Bitcoin self-custody, the risk is not really systemic anymore. The risk is entirely localized to you.
It is a massive shift in responsibility. I mean, in the traditional financial world, security is basically someone else's problem, right?
Right. You just assume the bank hired enough guards or whatever.
Exactly. But when you become the bank, a single blind spot in your operational hygiene can unravel the entire cryptographic fortress.
Yeah. And that's why we pulled these specific sources for you this week, because we know you are out there actively refining your own self-custody stack.
Yeah.
In this deep dive into the Bitcoin whole, we are analyzing the actual mechanics of that shift.
Right.
We're going to look at the catastrophic failures on other chains, some critical base layer vulnerabilities, and how the hardware ecosystem is desperately trying to adapt to this threat environment that now includes like AI, de-anonymization, and quantum computing.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It is a lot. So let's look at the foundation first. A public disclosure hit this week regarding Bitcoin Core, specifically CDE 2024-52911.
Right, the use after free bug.
Exactly. It's classified as a high-severity bug during script validation. Now, I know what that means in broad strokes, but walk us through the actual mechanics here. Like, how does a bug like this actually compromise a node?
Okay, so the mechanism here is deeply tied to how a node manages memory while it's verifying the blockchain. When a node validates a block, it has to pre-calculate and cache certain data so it can check transaction inputs efficiently. So it allocates a specific chunk of system memory for that task. A use after free bug basically means that under highly specific conditions, so in this case, if the node validated a special crafted invalid block,
right,
a background validation thread could attempt to access that chunk of memory after the system had already deallocated it or, freed it.
So to use an analogy, it's kind of like a hotel guest checking out, right?
Yeah.
The room is marked as empty in the system, but another part of the hotel staff is still trying to deliver room service to that exact room number.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. And in C++AO, which is what Bitcoin Core is written in, trying to access a dangling pointer like that, it doesn't just give you a polite error message.
It crashes.
It usually causes a hard crash.
Yeah.
So if an attacker had enough hash power to actually mine a block with sufficient proof of work containing this crafted payload, they could have weaponized that dangling pointer to basically crash victim nodes across the entire network.
Wow. And what makes this so significant is the timeline, right? Like this affected versions 0.14.0 all the way up to 28.x.
Yeah, it was lurking for a long time.
And it's finally fixed in version 29.0. But the fact that a vulnerability just sat there quietly in the code since version 1.14.0, I mean, it brings up this tension that I constantly wrestle with. We always praise the robustness of the network, but running a node kind of feels like maintaining the engine of a car while you're driving it at 100 miles per hour.
Oh, absolutely.
Like we just saw Umbrella OS release version 1.7.2 this week just to patch the Linux copy fail vulnerability. It's this endless treadmill of operational hygiene. Doesn't this highlight, I don't know, a terrifying fragility in relying purely on software consensus?
Well, it highlights the fragility of the code itself, yes, but I think you have to distinguish the code from the topology.
What do you mean?
The software absolutely requires microscopic paranoid vigilance, but the network topology, the physical distribution of the nodes, and the hash rate that is actively compensating for the software fragility, the decentralized edges of the network are just incredibly resilient.
Yeah, and those edges are proving to be aggressively robust.
Yeah.
Because we saw a post this week from an Umbrella user who just solo mined their second block from their living room.
Oh.
In 7 months, they were using this tiny soul miner setup connected to a public pool, and the sentiment in that community thread was just infectious. It was like, even on this network, the little guys can win.
Which completely shatters the mainstream narrative, The idea that Bitcoin mining is this closed game captured entirely by massive industrial data centers.
Right.
The localized action is thriving. Parman's new initiative, privatehash.net, is another great example of this.
Yeah, tell us about that.
He's basically building infrastructure that allows users to rent hash power directly with sats. And it generates signed proofs of the connection between the invoice and the payout address.
Okay, so it cuts out the middle layers.
Exactly. It's a deliberate effort to ensure the base layer validation remains distributed among individuals, rather than getting concentrated in just a few mining pools.
So we have this software layer that demands constant patching, but it's supported by a distributed architecture that just refuses to die.
Right?
And that architecture is what I want to zero in on next, because we really need to examine what happens when the underlying structural logic is fundamentally flawed. We have to look at the $1.5 billion Bybit hack and the $292 million KelpDAO exploit from this week.
Yeah, these were brutal.
And just to be crystal clear right up front, we are explicitly rejecting the DeFi framing here.
100%.
These are not decentralized finance anomalies. They are centralized architectural failures.
Yeah, the Bybit hack is basically a masterclass in why complex state machines are inherently dangerous for custody. I mean, they lost $1.5 billion in Ethereum from what was supposed to be a cold wallet.
Right, they use a safe multi-sig setup.
Yeah, it required 3 approvals, and each signer was using a ledger hardware device, which on paper to a corporate compliance officer.
That sounds impenetrable.
It sounds completely bulletproof.
But the breach didn't happen at the cryptographic level. The attackers compromised an AWS account that belonged to a developer for the safe user interface.
Right.
And they injected malicious JavaScript directly into the UI. So when Bybit's operator sat down to do a completely routine internal transfer, that JavaScript silently swapped the transaction payload in the background.
Yeah.
The screen showed a normal transfer, but the hidden instructions were entirely different.
And this is where the architecture of Ethereum makes the attack possible in the first place. Because it uses an account model with Turing-complete smart contracts, the attackers utilized a function called delegate call.
Okay, break that down for us. What is delegate call doing?
So the way delegate call works is it allows one contract to execute code from a different contract, but it runs that code within the calling contract's own storage context.
Meaning the malicious code basically gets the keys to the house.
Yeah.
It gets to rearrange the furniture inside the original contract state.
Literally. They use delegate call to rewrite the internal rules of the multi-sig wallet, completely changing the storage variables to transfer ownership to their own addresses.
Wow.
And the Bybit signers, looking at their hardware wallets, they couldn't see this complex state change on those tiny screens. They blind-signed the transactions because they trusted the compromised web interface. And the entire $1.5 billion was drained in 15 minutes.
15 minutes. It's insane.
Yeah.
And this is the thing. Blind signing is the ultimate human vulnerability. If you present a human being with a user interface they trust, they're going to click confirm. They're going to sit there and parse raw hex data.
No, nobody does that.
And this is exactly where Bitcoin's unspent transaction output model, or UTXO, proves its superiority, right?
Yeah, there is simply no delegate call equivalent in Bitcoin. Bitcoin scripts are entirely stateless. When a Bitcoin node evaluates a transaction, it just looks at the input script, pushes the data onto a stack, runs a simple set of operations, and returns a Boolean value.
Just true or false.
True or false, valid or invalid.
They validate, they do not mutate.
That is the core distinction. There is no global state to modify. An attacker cannot construct a hidden transaction payload that reaches into a Bitcoin UTXO and rewrites the rules of who controls it.
Right.
A UTXO either spends according to its original mathematically defined script, or the transaction fails. It isolates the risk to the specific output.
Which prevents the kind of cascading contagion we saw with the KelpDAO exploit.
Exactly.
Because in that case, a single verifier on a cross-chain bridge was compromised. But because the associated lending protocol uses a pooled liquidity model, that single stolen collateral asset caused $13 billion to exit the entire ecosystem in 48 hours.
It's terrifying.
The panic just froze every exposed market.
Because shared liquidity pools create systemic fragility. If one asset in the pool is compromised, the entire pool is compromised. And this is why Blockstream's roadmap for the Liquid network, which got updated this week, is highly relevant here.
Right, they're implementing ELEC 203.
Yeah, to remove the 21 million issuance limit for non-LBTC assets, and they're pushing forward with zero conf for instant settlement. But the actual architectural defense against contagion comes from their smart contract language, which is simplicity.
Right, and I understand simplicity is designed for high-assurance financial applications. But how does it actually stop a KelpDAO-style meltdown in practice?
By enforcing peer-to-peer architecture, simplicity is a typed combinator language. Because of how it's structured, you can statically analyze it.
Right.
You can mathematically prove the exact execution costs, memory usage, and potential outcomes of a contract before it is ever broadcast. So Blockstream's lending protocols built on this are discrete. Each loan is a separate peer-to-peer contract. There are no shared liquidity pools.
So if one specific loan contract fails or is compromised,
it has zero impact on the rest of the ecosystem.
the blast radius is contained. But that reliance on localized risk brings up a massive debate we are seeing play out this week across the hardware wallet ecosystem. Because if the UTXO model structurally prevents delegate Lexcall attacks, the hardware still has to prevent the human from blind signing a bad output.
Yes.
And the tools are evolving really rapidly right now to localize utility and force transparency.
We saw several major firmware updates drop this week. Specter DIY released version 1.10.0.3, and they actually flagged it as a mandatory update because they rotated their signing keys for future SD card upgrades. But the critical feature for our discussion here is full transaction transparency. Specter will now explicitly display the transaction version, the lock time, input sequences, and the replace by fee status directly on the device screen.
Now, for the average person building a multi-sig, why is exposing the lock time on the hardware screen such a big deal?
Because it ends blind signing for relative time locks.
Okay, give me an example of that.
Imagine you're building a degrading multi-sig for your inheritance. You want a setup where if you don't move the funds for 365 days, a backup key held by your family becomes active.
Okay, pretty standard.
Right. That requires a relative lock time. If your hardware wallet hides the lock time parameter during signing, the software interface on your laptop could secretly feed the hardware a transaction with no lock time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You click sign, thinking you're securing your future, but you just authorized a transaction that exposes your funds instantly. By forcing those parameters onto the device screen, Specter removes that blind spot completely.
That transparency is just non-negotiable at this point. Then we look at Blockstream Jade's update this week, version 1.0.4, and they went in a slightly different direction by expanding the device's utility.
Yeah, they did.
Jade now functions as a full offline two-factor authentication backup. You can import your Google Authenticator OTPs via QR code right into the hardware.
And you can export them via QR code if your phone is destroyed. But Blockstream made a very specific design choice here, and this is key. These OTP records live exclusively on the physical device's flash memory.
Okay.
They are not derived from or tied to your Bitcoin BIP39 seed phrase at all. If you restore your 12 words on a new device, you restore your Bitcoin, but your 2FA codes are gone. They are completely air-gapped to that specific piece of hardware.
Got it. And Foundation's Passport Prime is aggressively moving in that same direction, too. Their upcoming SDK includes a proof of concept for a QNAI password manager. They're adding 50 gigabytes of encrypted offline storage onto the device for things like recovery sheets and wills.
Right.
And they introduced Quantum Link, which is this post-quantum encrypted Bluetooth tunnel.
The quantum link mechanism is fascinating because traditional Bluetooth pairing relies on standard elliptic curve cryptography for the initial handshake, which is, theoretically vulnerable to future quantum attacks.
Right.
Quantum Link establishes the secure tunnel using post-quantum key encapsulation mechanisms.
So even if someone is sniffing the signal,
Even if an attacker is sitting in the room sniffing the Bluetooth packets between your phone and the passport, the data passing through that tunnel remains mathematically opaque.
Okay, I understand that cryptography is impressive, but I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. We just talked about putting a bank vault door on a tent. If the device holding my life savings is the exact same piece of hardware I pull out every day to check my Twitter 2FA or manage my website passwords, aren't we massively expanding the attack surface?
That is the big question.
A Swiss Army knife is convenient, but you don't use it to cut the wire on a bomb. Are we improving user experience at the cost of operational security here?
It is the single most contentious debate in hardware security right now. The argument against bundling features is exactly what you just described, surface area.
Yeah.
But consider the alternative. The industry has basically normalized keeping our most critical secondary security keys, passwords, 2FA, encrypted wills, and cloud-connected applications like LastPass or Authy.
Get breached all the time.
Exactly. The argument from Foundation and Blockstream is that an offline, purpose-built, secure element hardware device, even with expanded features, is just orders of magnitude safer than a general-purpose smartphone connected to the internet 24/7.
So it's about pulling the risk out of the cloud entirely.
Yep.
And localizing it to your physical environment.
Yes, and enforcing strict partitioning even within that localized environment.
Right.
Look at the update from Bitcoin Keeper this week. They're focused heavily on multi-sig policy, and they're actually using their software to actively enforce operational discipline. They now explicitly block users from putting two BIP85 hotkeys into the same multi-sig vault.
Because if two keys in a 203 multisig are derived from the exact same master entropy, you don't actually have a 203 multisig.
And no, you don't.
A single seed compromise gives the attacker quorum.
Precisely. They also block you from using your primary recovery key as a day-to-day signer. Redundancy only works if the points of failure are truly independent. If you're carrying your ultimate recovery key in your backpack to sign daily transactions, you have an illusion of security.
I love their ethos on this. They say, multi-sig discipline means knowing the answer before the emergency.
It's so true.
And having the software rigidly prevent you from shooting yourself in the foot is crucial, because the broader digital environment is just proving to be relentlessly hostile. I mean, we are debating whether to put passwords on hardware devices because the web browser is literally no longer a safe place to exist.
Right.
We saw disclosures this week that Microsoft Edge is currently loading all saved passwords, unencrypted, directly into readable memory the moment the browser launches.
It is a staggering security failure. And it isn't just decrypting the password for the specific site you're logging into. It loads the entire vault into system memory.
Which means if your machine has a latent malware infection, or if you're using a shared system, a basic memory scraping tool can just harvest your entire digital life in plain text without ever needing to break the encryption on the database file itself. It is wild.
It is.
And the threat to privacy is compounding when we look at the data broker level. Proton published a report this week demonstrating that data anonymization is functionally a myth.
The economics of de-anonymization have completely flipped because of AI. The research Proton highlighted showed that an AI agent can de-anonymize a specific user for a cost of just $1 to $4.
Wow. $1 to $4. And it only takes 15 seemingly random data points, a general location ping, an age bracket, a few disconnected browsing habits. 10 years ago, putting those puzzle pieces together required human intelligence and time.
Yeah, it was expensive.
Now, an AI model connects the dots instantly at scale. And while AI is eroding privacy on the commercial side, the state is actively pursuing the builders who are trying to construct these localized defenses.
Yeah, we saw a sobering update regarding Leonard Rodriguez, a developer for Samurai Wallet. And just looking at the legal filings purely as a matter of objective fact, without getting into the politics of the case or taking a stance on the underlying charges, the reality of his situation is just grim.
Yeah, he posted a public appeal stating he is over $2 million in debt from legal fees alone. He is facing federal prison. His quote was incredibly stark. He said, "For 10 years, Bill and I built open source code. The creators, however, are locked away in federal prison."
Yeah.
And he's pleading for community donations just to keep his defense viable.
It forces a really hard look at the personal liability of building self-custody infrastructure. You can write open source code that mathematically secures a user's sovereignty, but the state treats the deployment of that code as a personal prosecutable liability.
Yeah.
The developers are absorbing the systemic risk so the user can have localized privacy.
Yeah. And if the state and AI data brokers weren't enough, we have the ultimate cryptographical threat looming on the horizon, which is quantum computing. We saw Proton Mail begin their rollout of post-quantum encryption for their email service this week. The migration is officially starting across the tech industry. In the Bitcoin space, Blockstream research is heavily focused on how we transition the base layer. Jonas Nick recently presented on two concepts: shrintsies and shrimps.
The acronyms are playful, but the mathematics are critical for Bitcoin's survival.
What do they actually do?
So shrintsies stands for Schnorr signatures with localized quantum resistance. The core problem with quantum computers is that they can break the elliptic curve cryptography Bitcoin uses to secure public keys. The goal of shrintsies is to create a post-quantum signature scheme that can actually be verified inside a standard Bitcoin script using existing opcodes.
Okay, meaning we wouldn't need a massive, contentious network hard fork to implement a completely new cryptographic standard.
Exactly. It converts systemic quantum network risk into localized device risk. The network doesn't force everyone to upgrade. Instead, users who want post-quantum security can implement SHRIN-CCs within their own localized multi-seed scripts.
Oh, I see.
It shifts the burden to the individual to upgrade their personal vault. And then Shrimps is the companion piece. It optimizes the data footprint for secondary backup paths so that these massive post-quantum signatures don't bloat the transaction excessively.
Okay, so pulling all these threads together, the picture is intense. The state is prosecuting privacy developers, AI is connecting anonymized data points for pennies, browsers are leaking plain text memory, and quantum computers are threatening the elliptic curve itself.
It's a lot to take in.
Self-custody isn't just about holding your own keys to avoid a bank freeze anymore. It is about actively maintaining a digital fortress against a highly sophisticated adversarial environment. Is the average user psychologically prepared for this level of defensive thinking?
It requires a fundamental shift in mindset. But if we distill the week's developments, the tools to build that fortress are solidifying. Bitcoin's UTXO model structurally prevents the kind of smart contract contagion that vaporizes billions on other chains. Validate, do not mutate.
That is the ultimate architectural defense.
Yes. And at the user level, hardware signers are forcing transaction transparency, pulling the risk of blind signing out of the equation entirely. They are expanding to give you offline tools to protect your secondary secrets from leaky cloud infrastructure. The foundation is there, but the environment demands absolute vigilance.
You cannot afford to be passive. Which brings me to a final thought I want you to mull over this week as you refine your own setup. We talk about building an impenetrable digital fortress. But a fortress is completely useless if the people who inherit it don't know how to open the gates.
Yeah.
If something happened to you today, right now, would your heir be able to execute your multi-sig recovery calmly on day one?
That is the true test of your architecture.
Could they do it using only the written documentation you currently have stored offline? Or are the vital connecting instructions trapped inside your own head? Multi-sig discipline means knowing the answer before the emergency. Do not let your digital fortress become an impenetrable tomb for your family. Run a recovery drill this week. Test the hardware, verify your log times, and make sure the people who need the keys know exactly how they work. Because at the end of the day, you are the one pouring the concrete. Make sure the walls are solid and the door is actually open. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Stay vigilant, and we will catch you next time.